Thanks for taking the time to join us in this virtual space. And thanks in particular to my old friend Trip Fuller and to Sarah Lane Ritchie and the University of Edinburgh for this timely event. Speaking of timely, it so happens that early this year, I was finishing a book called Apocalypse After All, ? And then all of a sudden, the fourth horseman gallops across the world, the one who carries pestilence, as he has done many times since John of Patmos wrote that letter. But don't worry, I am not going to offer an exegesis of the book of Revelation, nor will I now proclaim the coronapocalypse. Little can be more theologically opposed to process theology than most readings of the apocalypse as the end, process over. Nonetheless, I find I do need to open this reflection today on process theology and the pandemic by way of that ancient equine metaphor, that meta-horse. You will recall that it is the Lamb, the mute and bloody quadruped Christ, who opens the seven seals. And with each of the first four, one of the four creatures thunders out, "Come," and a horse comes forth. The fourth creature, eagle-like, calls, and then the pale green horse appears. Its rider's name was Death, able to kill with famine and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. Unlike the others, this sickly green steed carries mostly non-human torment, like some sort of deadly payback by the non-human against a species grown disrespectful of the earth. The pale green meta-horse just suggests here the useful anachronism. Our present pestilence probably has its origins in wild animals, bats or pangolins, not attacking us, but delivering the virus. So maybe you'll hear the rhythm of ancient hoofbeats in the background as we consider the pandemic, its relation to a certain pandemonium, and its meaning for a possible panentheism. A leading ecosystem scientist, Richard Osfield, wrote recently that rodents and some bats thrive when we disrupt natural habitats. They are the most likely to promote transmissions of pathogens. The more we disturb the forests and habitats, the more danger we are in. So in other words, coronavirus can be read as an ecological, not merely medical crisis. In a recent Scientific American, John Vidal writes, only a decade or two ago, it was widely thought that tropical forests and intact natural environments teeming with exotic wildlife threatened humans by harboring the viruses and pathogens that lead to new diseases like Ebola, HIV, and dengue. But a number of researchers today think that it is actually humanity's destruction of biodiversity that creates the conditions for new viruses, like COVID-19, to arise with profound health and economic impacts. In fact, a new discipline, he writes, planetary health, is emerging that focuses on the increasingly visible connections among the well-being of humans, other living things, and entire ecosystems. So, of course, the relation between the human and non-human is irreducible to that between human and other animals. A more primal entanglement seems to be in play between what we consider life, the organic, and what is called non-life, the chemical, the geological. It is of that indeterminate crossover between organic and inorganic that the coronavirus is so spitefully reminding us. One virologist warned 20 years ago that the ambiguous status of a virus between biology and chemistry was preventing adequate understanding and therefore participation for coming pandemics. He wrote, regardless of whether or not we consider viruses to be alive, it is time to acknowledge and study them in their natural context within the web of life. Well, now it is indeed high time. Of course, the webbiness that has revealed itself with such poignancy during this time of our untouchability has been largely human interdependence. Endless articles on the web, the electronic one, have engaged the hope that we might, through this period of sheltering in place, come to a new collective awareness of our inseparability from each other in any place, that we might reach a new consciousness of our entanglement across every distance of location or status. And often these musings are not sounding like a cliche, we're all connected, but like an actual ripple effect of fresh awareness. And because it is a pandemic now making the point, there is also here the chance of rethinking the interhuman as woven upon the inhuman. That means that the virus, in its gray zone between life and non-life, does its thing as part of the web of life. That uncertain boundary between life and non-life has haunted not just virology and related fields, but also powerful reassessments of the meaning of being human within the web of life. So through no intention of its own, the virus offers a chance to strengthen the spreading awareness of our entangled difference with each other and with all the other creatures. We may hook that awareness into theories that have prepared the way of the insight, and that way converges with a theological path. So let me here note that the process theology, sometimes nicknamed Panentheism, maps onto a cosmology of radical interconnection, onto a democracy of fellow creatures. That is, of course, the century-old language of Alfred North Whitehead, whose vision incorporates not just biological evolution, but physics, the furthest from life, into a purposeful universe. Every creature, which is to say, actual entity, is a momentary event of interrelation. Creatures differ endlessly from each other in degrees and styles of complexity, but they all share a vibrancy, a pulse of experience, an unconscious affect of relation. Once Whitehead summarized it in just 2 words: nature alive. Down to the quantum elements, a kind of responsiveness courses through the world. But what of the process theology of divine responsiveness? We'll get to that. First, let me insist that any collective embrace of our interdependence needs a diverse company of thinkers. So for instance, Whitehead's influence upon the anti-theological Deleuze is key. And so upon current assemblages of so-called new materialists and affect theorists. Other affinities remain indirect and all the more important, also to theology. For instance, in her magnificent Mushroom at the End of the World, Anna Tsing writes that for her purposes, as an anthropologist working across human and non-human, as well as across Asian and Western worlds, I need something other than organisms as the elements that gather. I need to see life ways and non-living ways of being as well coming together. Such life ways then give rise to assemblages with shifting social and ecological meanings and menaces. So Tsing said in a recent interview, we have created a set of dangerous environments, and we can't just keep imagining that we can exclude them or put them elsewhere. So the big lesson of the virus is that there is no place to run. In our expansive and expensive reach across the planet, we seem to have cornered ourselves. In another brilliantly dissident voice, Catherine Yusof, scholar of inhuman geography, writes the following: The division of matter into non-life and life pertains not only to matter, but to the racial organization of life as foundational to New World geographies. She demands a radical revision of the field of geography, her field, in which the inhuman is a call across categories, material and symbolic, corporeal and incorporeal, intimacies cut across life and non-life. Intimacies cut across life and non-life. And she says of her book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, it goes in search of a grammar of geology for the storm next time. Channeling James Baldwin, she was not predicting this pandemic, but she has revealed a depth geology of the civilization that colonized for gain the non-human and the human planet, with particular disdain for those racial others who could not be counted as quite human, not even as fully alive. So to embrace my intimacy with the inhuman is to answer to those dehumanized humans, even as I rediscover the non-human, which therefore I am. Her conclusion bursts into the troubled world present with particular force. In her words, she asserts an insurgent geology for the end of the world, for the possibility of other worlds not marked by anti-Blackness, where the inhuman is a relation, no longer an appendage of fungibility. I appreciate her apocalypse, true apocalypsis, not prediction of final closure, but disclosure of possibility. In the meantime, capital depends upon the fungible, the property of a commodity whose units are interchangeable, so that each of its parts is indistinguishable from the others. And commodified beings remain externally related to one another. The inhuman as a relation, by contrast, exemplifies Whitehead's notion of internal relations. Each creature willy-nilly participates in the other creatures, assembling its world. So we have gotten cornered in a world of spreading fungibility. The economics that colonized the planet has gone viral. The pandemic rides an unprecedented globality, horsepowered by trade, industry, travel, carbon emissions, ever widening and whitening. The economics that runs the world leaves us nowhere to run, caught in the geology in which an epidemic could go truly pan. And this is not to exalt capitalism any more than the ancient imperialism that precedes it as the single cause of all systemic woes, original sin or true Satan. As in John's apocalypse, there are several horses and manifold demons. In our pandemically revealed world, there are multiple entangled ills, globally crisscrossing, double-crossing, crucifying. Pandemonium. Was it mere alliteration linking it to pandemic in my head? The words seem disconnected, almost opposed. The pandemic has spread eerie silence and orderly separation more than any wild and noisy disorder. Uprisings against the given order, suddenly breaking across my country as I record this, get cast as the dangerous chaos. Then I remembered the original meaning of pandemonium, all the demons. Got it. What a host of demons the pandemic has been revealing. Not supernatural spooks, but systems of normalized injustice, normally hidden in plain view, like all smart demons. For example, As the virus presented, so did the malignancy of a government repressive of science, let alone truth, and dismissive of its own responsibility to protect and care for its population. As the US election looms, so do demons of democracy's doom. But the systemic pre-pandemic torments are legion. The stunning statistics of the racial impact of the virus reveal nothing new about the US. We read that African Americans represent a third of all deaths from COVID-19, even though they represent only 13% of the national population. This disparity brings home the chokehold of the racism built into the housing, pollution, healthcare, education, and jobs of our cities. And the disparity needs policing. So suddenly the name George Floyd breaks across the US like another seal opening the revolution. Pending, but the revelation of nothing new, but of something systemic. Neoliberal capitalism relies upon the exploitation of Black and brown people. This doesn't make race and class at all identical. The global economics, as I stressed, has its own hyperdrive. But racism prances arm in arm with capitalism. And the pandemonium spreads by the day as US unemployment shoots toward the Great Depression's 25%. And now a fourth demon, a foodie one, pops into pandemic view. In the wealthy United States, a startling 1 in 5 families is currently suffering from food insecurity. Michael Pollan labels this brother demon the sickness in our food supply. Seems our normal diet of lots of meat and processed food causes chronic inflammation harmful to the immune system and resulting in underlying conditions. And in the present abnormal condition, the fourth horse delivers mass hunger. And The Guardian has as a headline right now, in America, the pandemic effects could leave 54 million without food. Amidst the pandemonium, I hardly need call out that usually quieter demon, ageism, now dancing front and center in the global pandemic. And of course, the Christian demon of homophobia wouldn't miss his viral or virile chance. See him, for instance, in the face of Ralph Drollinger, a minister who leads a weekly Bible study for Trump's cabinet. In his words, the disease expresses God's consequential wrath against those with a proclivity toward lesbianism and homosexuality, and also against those idolaters who worship the religion of environmentalism. So, yes, what of the Earth-sized demon of ecological demise and its choir of deniers? No one blames global warming or carbon emissions for the pandemic. The fever of the Earth and the fever of COVID-19 have different causes, but they present as symptoms of the same planetary pandemonium. For all its epical heat, global warming has remained on the back burner of most people's consciousness. The unprecedented floods and storms, heat and droughts are treated, no matter what the science says, as exceptions. So the double denialism of Trump's treatment of the coronavirus and of climate change makes for a match made in hell, doesn't it? And I mean that literally. The word pandemonium, it turns out, was invented by John Milton. Pandemonium is the name he gives the great city of hell in Paradise Lost, the high capital of Satan and his peers, all those demons. But it isn't Satan who planned this elegant new city. It's actually none other than Mammon who directs its construction. Mammon organizes demons and humans to mine the earth for its treasures, by which he erects the golden splendor of Pandemonium. So, in Milton's words, but with the wrong accent, men also, and by Mammon's suggestion taught, ransacked the center and with impious hands rifled the bowels of their mother earth for treasures better hid. Soon had his crew opened into the hill a spacious wound and digged out ribs of gold. In view of this horrifying rapist plunder of the mother planet, Milton goes on to warn, let none admire that riches grow in hell. So it's not John Milton, but John Cobb, knowing you cannot serve God and Mammon, who would write barely countable works for the alternative, the service of God and a sustainable social and economic justice. But by the way, by another odd synchronicity, Milton was not writing Paradise Lost at home in his capital city. He had fled London with his family in 1664 to escape the bubonic plague. It killed a quarter of the city's population in 18 months, an estimated 100,000, the number the United States seems already to have passed. The epic hell revealed by our own pandemic, Pandemonium, can again be masked as normality and order, not as the therapeutic order of social distancing and measured reopenings, but as the old order that formed civilization, civis, city, the ancient, ever mutating order of ransacking earth-violating systems, business as usual. And none of these systemic evils are new. They persist through mutating forms of exploitation, enslavement, extraction. At this moment, these pandemons dance garishly into view through the pandemic interruption, so they too get denormalized for a moment. And they seem too much, too many feverish issues to address all at once, too many for the I told you so's of any of our single causes, however noble. Between exhausting us with their apocalyptic too muchness and seducing us with their back to normal, the orderly disorder of our pandemonium may prevail for the tragically foreseeable future. Or, on the other hand, the pandemic interruption may help us to hold in consciousness and to confront the interconnectivity of our many too many burning issues. The Black womanist trope of intersectionalism captures that realization that questions of race compound with those of sexuality and class, and now even with geology. If the coronapocalypse has so rudely reminded us of the intimate intersection between life and non-life, it unveils, apocalypsis, the pandemonic dance and disfiguration of our material relatedness, our mattering intersections. Are we now beginning to move in a dance of death, disguised as a return to normal? Or might we together move against the pressure of mere return? In an essay that went, yes, viral, Arundhati Roy captured this choice. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality, she writes. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Of course, such secular imagining of a next world, another world, comes charged with theological associations. But Roy offers no fantasy of angels coming down to defeat demons, no escape through Peter's portal to heaven. Her pandemic portal offers no utopian, let alone supernatural guarantees, nor does any responsible theology. We would not want to come burdened with dead gods and other old baggage. The fight for another world does, however, call upon something different from optimistic unreality or stoic courage. It calls us to embrace the possibility of such a world, to embrace it together, and so to find ourselves gathering in touch, if not touching, as we go. For those of us who still somehow gather in religious assemblages, our traditions may strengthen that chance, or they may sabotage it. Churches may simply slump back into their own fading normal, or worse, join the demons in demonizing the abnormal among them, queers, environmentalists, and other heretics, and just wait for the omnipotent rescue. But some of our assemblages are biblically better tuned. Even the ancient prophetic figures of the new heaven and earth need translate no longer as supernatural intervention or afterlife escape. The new world, even John's New Jerusalem, evokes then not a replacement of this earth, but its radical renewal. In this work, process theology names one cross-religious approach among many, long dedicated to the healing of our planetary entanglement. Panentheism is one way, a way avoided by many process theologians, including John Cobb, of naming the work of process theology. I often use it, and long before pandemic alliteration, because it manages to name so much in a word: all in God. That is, the whole entangled immensity of the universe and of all possible worlds does not subsist somewhere outside of the Creator, as though God created, non de Deo sed ex nihilo, everything from and within a nothingness located outside of Him. If the divine infinity means anything, it renders such an outside impossible. Things can't exist outside of God if God lacks a circumference. But this infinity does not signify mere immensity. It means also radical intimacy. The Apostle Paul conveys this rather precisely in an ancient moment of cross-religious conversation in Athens. This God for whom we search and grope is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, Acts 17. We all only exist within this divinity, pan and theos, not as within a container, an enclosure, but as within a shared live process. Of course, intimacy can be confused with identity when the relational ontology of our entangled differences has been repressed. Then the web of life can be torn conveniently into fungible units. And of course, panentheism can be written off as pantheism, identity, not intimacy. A metaphysics of substance, theistic or atheistic, packages the units into separate identities, externally related. And as Cobb makes inescapably clear, the alternative demands its own metaphysics. I want to put it this way. All things, pan, come to be in a cosmic intersectionality from which there is no escape, on Earth or across the multiverse. If we recognize the living heart of the connectivity as divinity, that heart is the inmost, the Latin intimus, the intimacy of the infinite. But you might reasonably interject, what about James' finite God and his influence upon Whitehead? For now, let it suffice to say that Whitehead did not take up that bit of James, but shared his resistance to the notion of divine power as control. Whitehead's refusal of God's infinite power, of his omnipotence, is key to process theology's liberating theodicy. The reconceptualization of divine agency as entelechic and not efficient causation offers the divine lure or the aim of possibility rather than a causal force of control. So then the creation unfolds out of a beginningless and endless, infinite creativity. What Whitehead called the primordial nature of God calls the creatures forth and does not ever simply cause. It offers the lure or the initial aim, and what the creature in its moment of becoming, its every moment of Genesis chooses, however unconsciously, will shape the future. For every creature or actual entity responding one way or another to that call is a momentary assemblage, an assemblage of the present of its own vast but limited past world. But that present is the future of its past, and in an instant becomes the past of its own future. The present is the real potential of its becoming world, and the divine lure consists of a possibility that in itself would remain abstract. It can only become real possibility, and sometimes even actuality, through the choices of creatures. And those choices, especially in humans, can be systemically at odds with the lure. Hence, the trope of original sin remains meaningful. The implications for theodicy, and so for practical impact, run deep and present. For instance, I found it helpful to circulate a pastoral letter in March with no language of panentheism, no Whitehead quotes. It asked whether God sent the coronavirus as a punishment, like the White House Bible teacher's wrath of God against gays and environmentalists, or as an environmental lesson, or as a test. And the answers are no, no, and no. God works otherwise, even in and through a pandemic. I have on occasion been at pains to amplify certain biblical resonances with this theology of process. For instance, it invites a gospel-tuned attention to the lure of possibility. The parable of the sower illustrates that lure, that gift of possibility, as seed distributed prodigiously, abundantly, its nurture and its growth, depending on its reception. It may be received in shallow mediocrity, in stony indifference, or in deep and dark fertility. And the sower is neither indifferent nor in control. The sower does not do our work for us. In other words, the divine directionality of the creative process that is the creation itself always takes the form of an invitation, a calling, a let there be, of light, of earth, of sea. And the profound cooperativity within the creative process manifests long before humans or any biology arrive. Let the earth bring forth, let the sea bring forth. And the one calling then enjoys and suffers the unfolding results. In this ancient poetics, read panentheistically, we find no contradiction of scientific truths of cosmic fine-tuning, geological history, and biological evolution, including now rather strong evidence of human hyper-cooperativity rather than mere competitive aggression as our evolutionary advantage. Fresh clue there to the Imago Dei. Process theology, in its mainly, but not exclusively Christian voice, does not compete with secular truths. It depends upon them. But as Cobb makes clear, it is not the secular, but secularism, which is its own religion and remains incompatible with any theology. Indeed, as Cobb has argued, the originators of all the world's so-called religions, he would rather call them ways, are secularizers, calling their people to transform their world in their time, their seculum. Through his leadership, process theology has been part of the first response of any religion to the sciences of ecology, of climate, of economics. And process theology supports a politics in which the US president's pandemonic anti-science in response to climate and now pandemic would be unthinkable, as would be that of the Christian white right wing he so effectively manipulates. In this sort of context, a differently vocalized Christianity may be key to a wide enough solidarity and a deep enough history for us to be able to sustain resistance and more to fuel the insistence upon that new world. Such solidarity needs more than external relations between alienated individuals or single causes, however progressive. It needs the vigorous materialization of a mutual immanence that foments creative participation in each other, in each other's worlds, and thereby intimately partakes of an infinite becoming, known or unknown. This is to say, panentheism, by whatever name, helps to stimulate our fragile human hyper-cooperativity, even under conditions of social distancing. No one knows when the pale green horse will be put out to pasture this time. Pestilence and other pushbacks of the inhuman may be just warming up, but with its hoofbeat still audible, we are invited, even as we invite each other, even very other others, to dance on through the portal of the pandemic. Thank you so much for dancing along.